photographs. And interestingly, they must have been around for perhaps 30 years, while scientists were putting high voltages through vacuum tubes, generating X-rays, but not detecting them. So the question was, were there other forms of radiation out there still to be detected? So the scientists of the day began to search for them. Particularly, in this case, Henri Becquerel, he wondered if you were to take a fluorescent or phosphorescent substance like a uranium salt or fluorescein or eosin or zinc phosphide, expose it to light, and then try and capture any rays given off using the Röntgen technique of photographic film enclosed in black paper, would he see a similar blackening? Well, he had no success with fluorescein or eosin or zinc phosphide and the rest, but he seemed to have some success with his mystery rays with uranium salts. These were familiar because uranium oxide was used in some forms of glass to create this fluorescence. And in the bottom picture there, we can see some uranium ores fluorescing under the influence of ultraviolet light. But the strange thing was, although he got this blackening of light-protected photographic film, there was no need to activate in advance the ores or the chemicals. Simply laying the chemicals on the envelopes containing the photographic film would cause blackening. So on the right, we can see the first ever radio photograph of a lump of uranium ore there. And here we've got a similar piece of ore, this time with a Maltese cross in metal beneath it. So you've got the image of the Maltese cross. He had essentially discovered radioactivity a year after the discovery of X-rays. An important contribution by Pierre Curie was to estimate the strength of the activity by seeing how long it took to discharge a charged electroscope. Now, Pierre Curie had married the previous year Marie from Poland, a competent and driven scientist, and they were looking for a project that they could work together on, possibly using his electroscope. And with great insight, they noticed that some of the ores, typically pitchblende, was more radioactive than could be easily explained in terms of the uranium content. So with great vision, they decided that there was an undiscovered element present in the ore more radioactive than uranium. Okay, it's there, let them try and extract it. Now the figures seem to vary from which account you read on the internet, but typically 7 tons of pitchblende ore depleted from its uranium could be condensed down to perhaps 0.1 or 0.2 grams of radium fluoride, not very much, and a really marathon extraction process to yield a compound. However, within 3 years of the discovery of X-rays, they could report the isolation of radium, and this gave them the Nobel Prize in 1903. There's a picture there of Marie, a stylized portrait. Sadly, Pierre Curie died in 1904 in a traffic accident, and Marie seemed to go off the rails with grief Rather, she started an affair with a fellow physicist, which caused awful problems in the press at the time. The press, having built her up as a heroine of France, then took a dislike to her, as indeed happens today in the tabloid press, and really rubbished her and her career. However, over the years, particularly with the award of a second Nobel Prize, she was rehabilitated, and certainly during the First World War she was much loved as a French citizen. She started these petites curies, these little mobile X-ray vans which could travel the battlefields to X-ray wounded soldiers, and certainly thousands must have been saved by the application of these X-ray vans. She died in 1934 from aplastic anemia, possibly brought on by exposure to her radioactive materials, and her remains are interred, probably slightly radioactive, in the Parthenon alongside those of her husband Pierre. I turn now to the medical uses of radium. When I give this talk to a physical audience, I say that we recognize Marie on the left and Röntgen on the right, and I'd award a bottle of wine prize to anyone who can identify the man in the middle. And so far, that bottle of wine has not been given out. However, he is called Niels Finsen. I think he was a Norwegian, had a very, very short life, died when he was 43, and he gained the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1903. What for, you might ask? Well, the next slide will show he invented a thing called the Finsen lamp in 1895, and it was used to cure the incurable disease lupus vulgaris. And we have a picture of his Finsen lamp, which is essentially a high-powered UV lamp, and the UV radiation is transmitted through tubes with quartz lenses onto the patient. And he was curing patients of lupus vulgaris, which was a form of tuberculosis of the skin. And this is one of my before and after pictures. The victim on the left is showing the vulgaris on his forehead, and after treatment with the lamp, there he is, cured. So the Finsen lamp came out more or less at the same time that X-rays were discovered. There's an X-ray tube mainly used for diagnostic uses, and the classical picture of the bones of the hand and the ring on the finger. Could these rays be used for curative work? On the left, we have a picture of a little lad having a chest X-ray with very, very primitive conditions. The box contains the X-ray tube, and the radiologist is visualizing what's going on in the little boy's chest by using a screen coated with barium platinocyanide, which would fluoresce under the influence of the X-rays. And he would move the boy around, he'd move his screen around, move his hands around to get the possible image at a cost. Because it was soon found that these X-rays would have a terrible burning effect on flesh. And these are the hands of some radiologists who was cavalier in his behavior towards the X-rays, he damaged his digits and they had to be amputated. But if these rays, if X-rays could burn out flesh, could they be used to cure cancer, for example? Could they be used to cure breast cancer? And this was attempted very early on in these days. Emil Grubb in Chicago said he had attempted it, but sadly initially there was no success with deep-seated cancers. There was some success with skin cancers and superficial cancers, and later on then deep X-ray treatment could be used to tackle problems going on within the body. And this is a picture of a machine used to bombard the body with X-rays. You've got the high voltage apparatus on this side, the X-ray tube there, and patient. It says in the legend, a current of 2,000 volts. Well, the physicist looking in might well challenge that. The first people to report on the effects of radium on tissue were a chap called Friedrich Giesel and Otto Welkoff, who reported that radium shows the property a 20-minute exposure will produce an inflammation of the skin which will last 2 weeks, and is the same as obtained with long exposure to X-rays. Well, yes, they did, but in fact this effect of radium was known because Pierre Curie used to go and carry around a small vial of radium salt in his waistcoat pocket to show how it would glow in the dark. And he noticed that the effect of carrying the radium salt in a test tube in his pocket would cause inflammation and a reddening of the skin. However, the physicians of the day were determined to try and use radium salts in the curative fashion, certainly, I suppose, starting off with the notion that what worked with X-rays might work with radium. So Henri Danlo and Paul Bloch borrowed a sample of radium sulfate from Pierre in the Saint Louis Hospital in Paris in 1901. And what did they use it on? To treat our old friend lupus vulgaris. And there we've got a picture of it in action. I don't know if this is a stylized painting or a poor photograph, but if we read the legend at the side, treating a lupus patient with radium, St. Louis Hospital in Paris. There we are. What Paris was doing, London seemed to follow very, very quickly. And this is the London Hospital in Whitechapel, and it had on its staff a Dr. Sequeira. And again, he'd been using to treat superficial skin cancers with X-rays, and then he turned to radium, and he said that these small skin ulcers, rodent ulcers, movable, react well to radium, and it's advantageous over X-rays because you can use them in the neighborhood of the eye or in the angle of the nose. And he records he was using radium to treat these rodent ulcers as early as 1902. And here we have a rodent ulcer, also called a basal cell carcinoma. They don't spread to distant organs of the body and are normally not life-threatening, except if they spread into an important blood vessel beneath. The cure can be cured by surgical excision, X-rays, or, as Dr. Sequeira said, exposure to radium salts. This is a more gruesome picture. It's called brachytherapy, a short distance therapy, where you actually hold the radium source against the skin and the curative rays burn out the cancer. We have an individual looking rather sad on the left-hand side and marginally more happy, having been partially cured on the right-hand side. This is another picture of a before and after. We've got a skin cancer of the face there. The patient is treated with a plastic mold, and those little pencil-like white spots are radium sources in lead fastened to it, and the result of the treatment is on the right there, cured. This is an example from Australia of a do-it-yourself treatment of these basal cell sarcomas. the patients are given little lead bobbins in which there's a speck of radium, and they hold these bobbins against the tumour until they're told to stop, and that will burn out the tumour and cure them. Now, do we remember that Donald Trump suggested if we could irradiate the body internally, we might be able to cure the virus? Well, we're not quite sure what he had in mind, and X-rays can't get inside the body easily. But the idea was that radium and its salts could irradiate internally. So we've got here an apparatus that can be used against esophageal cancer. What you do, you swallow the active end of the apparatus there, you position it, you bite on that rubber bung there, and then the rays from the radium in here will affect the tumour within the body. And obviously it could be used for vaginal work and urethral work, and I presume rectal work as well. However, gentlemen, cross your legs and look at this slide. This shows the first use of radium needles against prostate cancer. These needles were about the size of bicycle spokes, and they're tipped with a small amount of radium metal. You leave them in position 18 to 21 days is recommended, and it'll destroy the tissue of the prostate gland. This form of brachytherapy is still practiced today, although you don't need to have the bicycle spokes to position the radium within the prostate. Radon gas, which is itself radioactive, is contained in small gold tubes or needles put in position. With its half-life, the radon decays within a fortnight or so, and the vessels can be left in position once they've been inserted, the radon gas having done its job. So that is still an accepted treatment of prostate cancer. We have another way of administering radium. This is called teleradiotherapy, where you apply the radium from some distance from the patient. You have in this apparatus on the left a bomb containing a relatively large amount of radium as a salt, 1 to 4 grams, and you approach the patient with this trolley-like device, the person manipulating it from the right-hand side against a tumour, and the patient has the dose of radiation. However, these contraptions fell out of use, and you had things where you would store the radium in a lead box on the left there. You would blow the radium source into the apparatus over the bed here. You would irradiate the patient with the radium, then you would suck the radium back into the box over here for storage. If you wanted to irradiate a deep tumour, but not affect the skin and the flesh above the tumour, the idea was to have multiple radium sources, essentially focusing their rays on the tumour itself, as shown in the right-hand diagram with the actual apparatus on the left-hand side. Did it work? Well, if we look at the figures on the left-hand side, surgery, radium, and look at the cure rate, 39%, 23%, 23% again, would indicate it didn't. But we have to remember that radium treatment was often a treatment of last resort, used on patients the surgeon wouldn't be prepared to touch. If you apply some selection, though, and this time only looking at cases where the cancer was not spreading, there was no lymph gland involvement, we can see that the surgery had a 39.6% cure, and the two radium studies had a cure percentage of 37.8 and 37.7. Respectable, far less painful, and far less scarring. With the enthusiasm for the use of radium hospitals sprang up far and wide. In Paris, we've got the University Radium Institute, pictured in black and white when it was first built, and in colour as it is now. And if we go to London, we will see the London Radium Institute round the corner from the BBC. That's how it was. That's how it is now. Certainly, surely deserving of an RSC blue plaque. Inside there, we've got the treatment room. You've got the radium bomb here over the patient there. That's the storage for the radium source, and I don't know why the cupboard there has been labelled P. The radium source is manipulated on these wires here, and I suspect this is electrical flex leading to lights within the source to illuminate the area of treatment. Apart from the use for cancer treatments and the like, the scientists of the day tried to use radium salts as conventional medicines, and it was used with the best will in the world, certainly not as snake oil remedies. They tried to cure high blood pressure using it, the pain of diabetic neuritis and arthritis. Nothing really came from that. But if we move on to fairly recent work, for the case of inoperable cancer, usually bone cancer in this case, if they treated the patients with minute doses of radium sulfate, the radium would go into the position in the bones which was actively growing the cancer, like calcium, and the rays given off, the alpha rays given off, would kill those cells, and it would relieve the patients from some of their pain. The final one on this, we might remember that Humphrey Davy tried to cure people from TB, tuberculosis, by exposing them to various gases in the Bristol Pneumatic Institute. Well, TB was still killing people 100 years on, and Soddy of isotope fame suggested that the emanations from radon gas might be useful in curing TB. Well, it wasn't, and you had to wait until the chemotherapy of the 1950s before TB could be partially conquered. I want to touch on the last part of my talk with medical uses of radium as unconventional therapies, based on the idea that radium, being full of energy, could vitalize the human body. And this was backed up by advertising claims which will certainly not be allowed today. In Oklahoma, it was found that spring water was relatively rich in radium. Bottle it up, sell it to those who want it, and it will cure you from rheumatism, eczema, and stomach troubles, it says. Alternatively, take this allegedly radium-rich water, boil off the H2O so you have a deposit. Incorporate that deposit in glaze in the inner part of that vessel we see on the right. And there you have radium-rich water. Alternatively, you can take that deposit or go to the mines of Eastern Europe which can produce a pitchblende. Take a minute amount of radium, put it in a rayode, that metal vessel in the bottle there, put in your water, and then drink it to your heart's content. It'll cure rheumatism, gout, period pains, neuralgia, constipation, nerves, auto-intoxication, and gentlemen, listen, lack of bodily vigor. And it tells us, do we believe this, quickly relieved in a natural way without drugs or chemicals. The way to make radium water in your own home, indeed. Alternatively, you could go to Oklahoma and bathe in it. These are the Oklahoma baths. One bath costs $1, and a massage adds another 50 pence to the price. If you can't afford to go and have a bath in radioactive water in Oklahoma, you can obtain radioactive bath salts. I don't know if they come from the same place, but you have to empty the contents into a quart of hot water, remain in the bath for 45 minutes, cover the bath, I presume, to absorb any radiation given off, and then relax. What about restoring hair color? Caradium. Well, that name implies it is rich in radium, and it is hinted that it might contain radium, but it emphasizes that this miracle preparation is not a dye, yet it would restore hair color to gray hair. I think it's probably silver nitrate. Reformhaus is the German for health food store. Walter Schroeffel in Reichenberg was selling radioactive bread, radium bread, baked with, twice baked no less, with radium-rich water. There we are. You can, I suppose, in those days, obtain a radioactive soap. Its name, faux radia, implies to me it might contain thorium as well as radium, thorium being a lot cheaper. But if we see at the bottom, it is prepared according to a formula from the handily named Dr. Alfred Curie. No relation to Marie or Pierre, but a handy name by which to market it. In need of an energy lift, take some radium chocolate. And what about these? I don't know if these are genuine or not. These are chocolates which are topped with little globs of radioactive icing that would glow in the dark. Now, is this something obtainable from a joke store, or were they actually marketed? Harper's radium-containing chocolates. I'd have thought, though, it's a pretty lethal way of having, well. Now, the curious found that the radium that they produced in large amounts would give off heat spontaneously. Not much, but enough to perceive with a very sensitive thermometer. So the idea was, because source de chaleur, a source of heat, then you could incorporate radium in wool and use it to knit warming underclothes. But all the previous ones were harmless, apart from relieving the gullible of their money. This preparation, Radithor, was not. Eben Byers, aged 50, on the right, fell out of bed and hurt his elbow. He drank a bottle of Radithor in the middle and recovered. His elbow no longer hurt, and he thanked Radithor for this miracle cure. and drank lots and lots of it. So much so, he died 2 years later from disseminated bone cancer, the radium having gone into the bones and had caused enormous damage. This is a radioactive coaster, still available 16 years ago. You could improve the taste of a drink by placing it on the coaster for 2 or 3 minutes, irradiating it. It worked apparently on distilled spirits, but not on beer, wine, or sake. This is a health aid. It's a plate about the size of a credit card, pasted with uranium ore, so it's not really radium, but I'll include it here. What does it do? You slide it alongside your cigarettes in the packet, and it will bring you a soft, mild flavor without affecting the original tobacco paste, and it'll reduce the nicotine tar and harmful gas, it says. And those were in Japan until 1900. On a similar vein, this Lifestone cigarette holder contains a tiny radioactive radium source, and it'll protect you, it says, from the injurious elements in cigarettes and makes it sweeter and milder. It's also claimed that it will protect the users from lung cancer, promising beautiful faces and excellent health, as late as 1964. These are radioactive glasses. From their size, I would think they probably contain uranium oxide, and they would cure you of myopia, hypermetropia, presbyphobia, or heterophobia, which to me sounds like the fear of the opposite sex, headaches, eye strain, and all the rest. And you'd have to wear them for 5 to 10 minutes a day with your eyes closed. Now, what do we have here? The lady in the bed is obviously cross and disappointed because she's not being satisfied by the very glum-looking individual, the man sitting on the edge. Really, he needs to be vitalized, or parts of him need to be vitalized. And who would have thought that one of the major contributors to sex aids of the time was Ernest Rutherford? And they took this statement: there was reason to believe that there was an enormous store of latent energy resident in atoms of radioactive elements. Energy which was derived from the internal energy of atoms. Okay, this latent energy store, let's pass it on to impotent men. Let's give them, or sell them better still, a contraceptive sheath, a Durex, impregnated with radium, in the hope the energy from the radium would impart itself to the individual. And if, I suppose, the contraceptive glowed in the dark, well, that would add an added frisson to life in the bedroom. If you needed more power, you could take a radium suppository. And this is recommended, it says, for sexually weak men who should try Newman tablets for the best results. Also, it says, splendid for piles and rectal sores. Try them and see what good effects you get. If you had a lot of money, you could get the radio endocrinator. 1924, price is $1,000. This was a gold-plated device. You can see it on the right there. Within that gauze, there's cardboard that had been soaked in radium salts. And the idea was, if you were a sexually weak man, You will go to bed wearing a jock strap or an aesthetic support. You will slip in those 2 gold devices in the support and sleep away whilst being energized. This is a picture I spotted on eBay of a gentleman of that period who may or may not have been trying these indoctrinators. Look at it carefully and decide whether or not he has been. What about today? Well, I was visiting a friend's house last week, and in his bathroom he had a display of Radox bath soaking gun. But Radox came around from 1908, and the name is suspicious to me because that was a time when radon or radium in its various forms was a strong marketing aid. Where did Radox get its name from? Well, I have to say, I have doctored that picture because the original box says Radox radiates oxygen. So they claim it's nothing to do with radium, which of course is now thought to be frowned upon. They say it comes from radiates oxygen, and I will say, well, they would, wouldn't they? Allegedly. So there we are. I thank the university for providing research facilities which gave rise to this talk about 10 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. A wonderful talk as always, and many unusual aspects, I might say. We've got a few questions, not very many, but we have a few questions here, and I'll give you the first one in a moment, which in fact is from me actually. I mean, how did definition work? I mean, what were the rays that it gave off? I mean, you sort of bracketed it with X-rays, but was it X-rays or the ultraviolet rays?
Well, no,